done yesterday. Still not ideal, but we're making progress. So thanks for bearing with us. So my name is Carole, and I'm co-organizing this session with Kim Carlson here and Jenny Gerber over there. And we also had from Matikumu volunteering the last minute to help us as well. So I'm going to call the first speaker, Janelle. Can you come? Yeah. And you have the microphone already, the clicker. Yeah. So Janelle Sylvester on deforestation.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying I only got to the last.
You will have 13 minutes, including questions, so we aim for like 8 to 10, and then, whatever remains for questions. Great. Floor is yours, Janelle. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. I have to hold it really close, I think. Okay. So, hello, everybody. My name is Janelle Sylvester. I'm a research specialist at the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, also referred to as the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT. I also serve on the CJIR's Environmental Health and Biodiversity Impact platform, and I'm completing my PhD at the University of Copenhagen. And today I will be talking to you all about food system drivers of deforestation. Okay, great. So we're in a session for sustainable food systems, right? Well, currently, the food system is a significant source of greenhouse gas emissions, and 1/3 of emissions from the food system comes from land use and land use change. And when we talk about emissions from land use and land use change, frequently we are talking about deforestation. That is because deforestation Click down. Oh, that's my fault. Sorry. Okay, yeah. That is because deforestation accounts for roughly 45% of total emissions from the affluent sector. Now, the greatest direct driver of deforestation, the activity that contributes the most to driving deforestation, is agricultural expansion, is agriculture and livestock production. Therefore, if we want to reduce land-based emissions and work towards sustainable food systems, we need to address deforestation for food production. And in order to do this, we need a better understanding of the underlying drivers, the indirect forces that drive deforestation for food production. And so I'm putting emphasis on deforestation for food production because if deforestation occurs for food production, it can be considered as an outcome of the food system. So the food system consists of food system elements and activities, and the food system outcomes are the outputs of those activities, consisting of food and nutrition security, social, economic, and environmental outcomes. And within the environmental outcomes is where we would find deforestation. Now, most of our understanding of deforestation and its underlying drivers comes from a land systems perspective. And we have yet to really look at deforestation through a food systems lens. Thus, we have little understanding of which dimensions of the food system are most influential in driving land use change. And such understanding is critical for developing interventions that can contribute to reducing deforestation while simultaneously contributing to positive outcomes of the food system. And a key part of this study is that we're looking at deforestation as an outcome of the food system. So in our study, we first set out to develop a framework that could be used to identify the food system dimensions and dynamics that are most influential in driving land use change. And to do so, we integrated drivers of food systems based on the work of Christopher Binet, and the drivers of land systems based on the work of Geist and Lambo. And in our framework, the drivers are organized under the 3 food system dimensions of consumption demand, production supply, and trade distribution. We added a fourth category for the policy and institutional variables that are not related to food trade, which is the last blue box at the bottom. But in this study, we will only be focusing on the first three boxes corresponding to the three food system dimensions. And the idea is that by looking at and modeling the drivers of food systems, we can better understand how dynamics related to consumption, demand, production, supply, and trade distribution contribute to driving deforestation as an outcome of the food system. So we took the framework into action at the global and regional scale using a machine learning approach. We used data for 12 variables corresponding to the drivers within the different food system dimensions. And we used data from 40 tropical countries for the period 2004 to 2021. And we used the multiple extreme gradient boosting, the XGBoost algorithm, to construct models at the global and continental scales. You can see here the variables that we had included in the models. We were not able to find variables for every driver category that we had in our framework due to data limitations. But nonetheless, we were still able to construct strong models at the global scale, as well as for Latin America and for Asia. Those three contributing to or explaining over 70% of observed deforestation. And okay, no. Great. What we found at the global level was that in variables related to the consumption demand dimension and the trade distribution dimension were most important for explaining deforestation, particularly the rural population decline, which was perfectly correlated with urban population growth. So we're using it as a proxy of urbanization, and as well foreign direct investments. And then in Latin America, we found that foreign direct investments, again, was an important variable or explained a considerable amount of deforestation, as did GDP of exports, which was interestingly found to have an inverse relationship with deforestation. For Asia, we also found that rural population decline, or rather urban population growth, was a considerable variable alongside elevation, which was included as a biophysical variable. And lastly, for the model for Africa, it was the model was weaker compared to others. It explained less deforestation than the other scales. And this is likely because of data limitations that precluded the inclusion of variables related to governance and institutions, which plays a big role in driving deforestation in Africa. So to draw out some main conclusions, foreign direct investments related to the trade and distribution dimension, and urbanization related to the consumption, demand and consumption dimension, emerged as the most important drivers in our analysis. And what role these two variables play in the food system, the roles are quite large, and I don't have time to go really deep into it. But we know that urbanization leads to changes in diets. It leads to, especially, it's often paired with rising incomes, which is linked with an increase in meat consumption. And the urban lifestyles are frequently linked with an increased consumption of ultra-processed, convenient foods. And this rising demand in urban centers that we've seen, we've been able to meet that demand, particularly with the support of foreign direct investments, which is most evident by the role of foreign direct investments in the supermarketization of food systems in low and middle income countries. Foreign direct investments support infrastructure development. They support the development of foreign retail chains, And these retail chains are able to support the economies of scale, which then make these processed foods more available and more affordable. In turn, having a large impact on the food system and on consumption dynamics. But that's only one part of it. An important part of our study was that we didn't look at foreign direct investment in agriculture. We looked at cross-sector foreign direct investments because we're interested in knowing how foreign direct investments, irrespective of the sector, contributes to or influences land use decisions, ultimately affecting deforestation. Foreign direct investments in, for example, mining or infrastructure can have an impact on the value of the land and the profitability of forest conversion. So, just to conclude with some of our recommendations, some of the outcomes of the study, as I mentioned, we're interested in understanding this cross-sector influence, or the cross-sector foreign FDI influence. But right now, our understanding is very limited because of data limitations. So we call for increased availability and transparency in data, of data of foreign direct investments. We also, as we've seen with the urbanization being part of the consumption demand dimension, a lot of the efforts now to curb deforestation have been focusing on international supply chains, on exports, and we argue that these efforts need to be paired with demand-side measures, as not just our study, but several other studies have demonstrated that there's deforestation for domestic consumption is increasing. So to have more effective impact on reducing deforestation, we recommend to pair with demand-side measures. Great. And so just to conclude that we recently published the study. I encourage you all to read it if you'd like to know more about the role of these variables in the food system and our approach to analyzing deforestation as an outcome of the food system. So thank you all very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Janelle. We have time for some questions from the audience. Yes, questions. Yeah. Okay. I think this is perfect. Oh, that's pretty crazy. Okay,
just a clarification. You mentioned the rural population. Could you please say what it actually means in detail? One of your drivers was rural population.
Yes, it's the decline of number of people, of rural inhabitants. We had both the urban. We looked at both the urban population and rural population. Oh, I guess I can't pull up my the source of the variable. I think from the FAO stat. But yeah, they have a definition of what they define what is considered rural and what's considered urban. I think it's based on the number of inhabitants that are there.
Thanks. I think we take. Who else had a question? You have a question. Okay. And then.
Hi. Thanks a lot for this presentation. Very interesting. If you could elaborate briefly on the sectoral differentiated effects of FDI. You mentioned mining and other extractive sectors obviously having a negative effect. Do you account, for example, for any backward positive linkages from FDI in upstream sectors, as in food manufacturing, as in improving productivity in agriculture or enhancing agroecological practices, or whether this, as you said, has to be moderated by some sort of FDI screening or increased regulation on the topic? Thanks.
Yeah, that is a great question.
Janet, sorry, can we take the other question and you can answer them both just for time? Thank you.
It's a very interesting presentation. I spotted that you mentioned urbanization as one of the causes of tropical deforestation. This seems to be in contradiction with the traditional theory of forest transition, in which people move to the city and then the forest can regrow, like happened in the United States in Europe. So you see this contradiction as well, or maybe it's something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start with that one, and then I'll get that one. Yes, definitely. I think that's kind of where maybe the foreign direct investments comes in, because essentially, if we're able to displace agricultural production to areas where the land is cheaper and where it's more profitable to produce, that's while people are moving to urban centers. I mean, it's definitely complex because that kind of production can also create jobs. But no, I wouldn't say that it necessarily aligns with the forest transition theory, but I think there are that kind of globalization dynamics that we kind of only lightly have a grasp on, mainly because of data limitations. But yeah, I think it comes into those dynamics related to the value of land and value of forest conversion. And foreign interests, perhaps. And then the other question was, so in our analysis, we were not able to capture that. We didn't do any disaggregation of FDI, but that's definitely a big part of it, especially the interest for governments in terms of receiving foreign direct investments, because they can have, of course, benefits in terms of increasing productivity, jobs, economic development. They contribute a lot to that, which is usually a priority for low and middle income countries. But several studies have shown that they also have negative impacts on like food nutrition, food security, and just overall. I mean, what I can argue in the paper is its overall influence in shaping food systems. And kind of that like interconnection between contributing to urban development, which then connects to changing diets, and but future studies should look at that. Okay, great, thank you.
What's the next one? It's Eve, right? Eve? Thank you, Jen. I'm sorry, I was like dealing with the PowerPoint.
Okay, so next up we have Eve with talking about oil palm landscapes in Peru. So. Yes.
Yes.
Now. It's over.
Okay. Thanks a lot. And happy to present this study, which is actually part of Diego Brizuela's PhD thesis, who is here too, but he's presenting in the afternoon, and as everybody only presents one presentation, I'm giving that one. So this is about oil palm in Peru, and just to get started straight away, downwards. There we go. So in the global context, palm oil is known to be a driver for deforestation, especially in East Asia. It's a very efficient way to produce oil, actually. That's why it's very popular on the global market. And the demand is growing and expected to keep growing. And at present, Latin America is not yet a world leader, but it is the fastest growing or fastest expanding region for the production of palm oil, and that's our justification why we zoomed into that region. And especially in the Peruvian context, palm oil is more or less only produced in two regions, San Martin and Ucayali. And, does that work if I... No, doesn't. Here? No. So I do the old style. So this area of San Martin, for example, and this area was traditionally strong coca production areas, and which usually coca needs like a certain altitude. It's usually grown where it can be transported easily, so it's like not too far from the road, but just far enough so it's not obvious. and so in a term of economic development, it moves a bit inwards, and then other crops come in, and there was since the 90s there was a strong interest in combating coca production, and so there was a lot of support for farmers to transform to change to other sorts of production, and among these palm oil. And it's mostly small and medium-sized producers, and most of the production is, I said that. And to be honest, or to be quite frank, it's not many economic opportunities there for smallholders in these Amazon regions. There's like coffee, but there you need even more altitude. There's some cacao coming in. There's rice production, fruits, and palm oil. And palm oil is actually if you look at it economically, a very efficient way of producing in palm, so income. And there has been a decentralization of competencies in terms of environmental governance into the region since 2002, after the Fujimori regime ended, and then more and more responsibilities get taken over by the regional governments, and they're quite diverse in their abilities and their capacities of dealing with land use changes and other environmental challenges. What we've done is a mixed method analysis. We've done a spatial analysis of deforestation and expansion of palm oil, and on the other hand, we have done a series of qualitative interviews with farmer associations, with governmental representatives, with companies, with all sorts of stakeholders involved, directly or indirectly in palm oil production. And then we have coded the driver or the factors that determine whether palm oil is grown sustainably or if it causes deforestation. And we have inductively coded them. And I want to focus on these three dimensions here: market aspects, socio-demographic factors, and land use governance factors. And when you look at the palm oil development in Peru, in the blue line you see the expansion in San Martin, and in the green line in Ucayali you can see that it's like not a linear gradient, but it's like it has certain stages of expansion. There was like a first stage where, as I just mentioned, it was promoted initially. There's some quotes there of how the interviewees described it. So there was the first wave of promotion. Then palm growers begin without the government support, only with national corporation support. And then there's the market demand, and there's a production without much technical support. And then at the same time, you see how the prices actually increase, and how there's like also a stronger demand for palm oil, and which serves as an incentive to expand. So zooming in on the first stage, as I said, there has been a lot of cocoa production in the past, and there's been this alternative development programs that had initially a quite naive approach to simply supporting everything that is not coca. And palm oil was something they focused on a lot, but it was not that profitable at that time. And as I said, the decentralization of the governance systems only started, and San Martin actually had like a government that was like a front runner in that term. They developed their ARA, their Autoridad Ambiental Regional, and developed their zonificación ecológica económica, which is like a land use zoning of which land use is supposed to be where, as a reference to then give out land titles and to support concessions and so on and so forth. And then there was the second stage, the market demand increases, and while the cocoa replacement programs ended, the associations started to strengthen themselves or to consolidating themselves. And there's a change of generations also, and people who grow up as palm oil producers, who perceive themselves as palm oil producers, and who expand the business. There's an increasing transfer for competencies to regional governments. There's been several cases of concessions that have been demanded by investors but had not been given, but certain concessions have been given, and you can see these peaks here. These are forest conversions due to palm oil. There was one big investment in San Martin, and one big investment in Ucayali, where several thousands of hectares were converted, basically from one day to the other. And that's just an idea of how it could look like if there wasn't a stronger regulation, stronger governments, but that has been up to now only been limited to these two cases, so there's no strong frequency of these events. And then over time there's been like a stronger reduction of deforestation rates, especially in San Martin. Those were the two cases, Barranquita and Ocho Sur. And there's a third stage where the demand increases, and more and more only also sustainability characteristics came in. I found this very interesting that actually because of this demand of zero deforestation, you know, there's the EU regulation, for example, and like a current awareness that in order to have like a good branding on the global market, you need to take on certain sustainability characteristics. And so palm oil is actually consumed internally mostly. So like 60-70% is consumed internally. So it's not the demand side that requires that, but it's like, in that case, international companies who dominate the food market within Peru and establish sustainability criteria that then spilled over to the major investments who gave themselves a no deforestation policy, and which actually makes a difference. And but we can see that the zonificación, so the land use governance, is still not very powerful and not implemented. So it's actually weaker, and it can't control the expansion efficiently. Well, I'm running out of time, so maybe just to conclude. So market demands actually are a very important lever on deciding whether palm oil is expanded, and also if sustainability criteria are brought in. But it requires traceability and a reference. That's why this zonificación is so important, to have like a reference legitimized by the government to indicate where there's forest area and where there's not. I forgot to mention that there's also like palm oil needs a plain area, so there's limits to where it can expand or where it cannot expand, and there's degraded areas, so zonification could actually very well identify where there's areas with potential. And land use governance has shown to provide impact, but it's increasingly diluted, and there's not a legal backbone from the national level to support regional governments in really implementing that policy. And there's corruption. And working in the Amazon can be fun. Just want to leave that on a positive note.
Thank you, Yves. We just have time for one quick question. Thank you.
So you mentioned that there's mostly like 70 or 60% of that demand is local for the oil palm product. National. So does it mean like Peru has increased its oil demand overall, or has it substituted other oils? I guess like this is not part of the scope of the work, but an interesting question to see whether there's been like any land sparing because of oil palm being a more productive oil than the other sources of oil, and whether that could be labeled as a sustainable kind of gain if oil palm is now growing where coca used to grow through the certification mechanisms or sustainable palm oil initiatives.
Well, we haven't done a market analysis of the food market and where oil is coming from. Apparently, it was an efficient source of oil, and there was demand for it in the food market naturally. And there was no other plant producing oil in the Amazon. So if there was an alternative oil source, it was coming from somewhere else, right?
So Peru has an internal deficit of fats and oils, and until recently was a net importer of oil palm. Now it's starting to export, but most of the demand stays in the country because they don't produce enough fats and oils for their own food market system.
Thank you.
There you hear the expert.
Thank you very much, Yves. We need to go to the next speaker, but thanks a lot for discuss afterwards. So our next speaker is PhD student Kira Fassner on West Africa. I will let you, Kira, present us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Kira. I'm working at the University of Kassel, and I'm going to talk today about urbanization, cropland use, and food consumption along rural-urban transects in West Africa. West Africa is one of the fastest urbanizing regions in the world. Since the 1960s, urban land is increasingly expanding from the humid coastal zones to the arid inland zones. And this trend is challenging existing food systems, food markets, food distribution networks, and the length of supply chains. So distances between food producers and food consumers are growing. Most of the food is not produced in urban regions or in the peri-urban systems, but is increasingly coming from more distant rural hinterlands and from rural systems, which are supplying the urban market. An example for this is the onion trade. We have looked at onion flows from northern Niger to coastal cities in Ghana. And we found that onions are increasingly produced in very distant, marginalized and arid rural systems and are transported over huge distances to the growing urban markets on the coast. These are some pictures from the producers in the mountains and the violet onions that are sold on the markets. My last paper was about land use changes in these rural systems, and we mainly found that rural populations are transforming the whole landscape to produce food products for urban markets. So they're moving from small-scale subsistence production to very large-scale production of onions, but also garlic and potatoes. So dry products that are easy to store and to transport over long distances under very harsh climatic and infrastructure conditions. But when I was doing my research, this is what people were eating actually every day. And what you see is rice and pasta. and I think this was a bit surprising for me. So people are selling their products that they're growing, and at the same time importing more modern, stable foods from outside. So for this study, I was asking, how does urbanization affect urban, peri-urban, and rural agricultural land use, and how do changes in cropland and food consumption patterns vary between the selected regions? And to do this, we followed the onion chain and selected study sites in southern Ghana, in southern Niger, and in northern Niger. So from the humid coast to the arid inland zones. And we looked at both rural and urban systems. And what we did was first remote sensing analysis of cropland changes. So we looked at how cropland in the selected sites have changed from the year 2008 to 2023. And in these selected sites, we did household surveys with approximately 50 households in each selected site. And we were asking about food consumption patterns, so frequency of meat and milk products, daily composition of meals, and where people are buying their food. For the results of our remote sensing analysis, for Ghana, we can see that in all sites, so in the rural, in the peri-urban, and in the urban site, cropland is decreasing, which is the orange area. So the orange area was transformed into build-up or infrastructure after the year 2008. While in Niger, we can see we have an opposite trend. Cropland is expanding, so the dark green area is the cropland that has been added after the year 2008. So we assume that there are displacement effects because of urbanization. Urban land in the coastal regions is taking up cropland, and in the more arid regions, cropland is expanding. This is also reflected in the calculations. So especially in the dry region, in the Agadez region, we have a high increase in cropland. For our results on the household surveys, I will talk about the two last factors here because more than 50% of the interviewed persons in almost all selected sites reported that there was a change in their daily milk consumption and in their food access point. So these are the results on the questions on how often people consume milk products. And what was quite interesting here was that in all rural places, milk consumption is declining. And the reported main reason was that people are focusing on the cultivation of cash crops, and livestock products are more for subsistence production, and this is declining. For the question where people are buying food, we see an overall trend towards decreasing subsistence production and an increasing or a more important role of local shops and street markets, while the often discussed supermarket revolution we found only in the urban places, especially the urban upper class that is buying in supermarkets. Then we also ask about food security, so if people are worrying that they have not enough food. And here we see an overall positive trend, except for the rural and peri-urban area around Accra. here people reported, that the situation is getting worse because many former farmers have lost their cropland due to urbanization. At the same time, there's a lack of other job opportunities and high food prices. So our results indicate an overall decline in local food self-sufficiency. Cropland in southern Accra is declining, and there are land use conflicts between build-up and cropland. In Niger, cropland is expanding, but it's mainly used for supplying urban markets with fresh fruits and vegetables. So overall measures for food system sustainability should take overall land use changes due to urbanization, telecoupled land use, and overall food system changes into account. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kira. I think we have time for questions. So Jamie has microphone. Any questions for Kira? Interesting study. Thank you. There's one here.
Yeah, about the onion cultivation, I've seen it in Morocco, and there it leads to huge depletion of the aquifers and conflicts over the water. Is that the same in this arid area in Niger and the other places that you studied?
The people are facing groundwater shortages. They expanded the land, and everyone has now an individual groundwater well, and they have problems with irrigation, because if the rain is coming too late or not enough, then they don't have enough water to irrigate the expanding fields.
We have one here. Thank you.
Super interesting presentation. Thank you. I was wondering, did you do 2 survey rounds, one in the past and one closer to the present, or did you ask people to remember what it was like in the past, and were they able to do that?
We were asking people how they perceived it 20 years ago. So we didn't do it 20 years ago. So we were just asking. Yeah.
Thank you.
We have time, I think, for one more question. Well done on keeping to time. I have time for one last question. Do you have a question? Maybe. Jamie, you have a question yourself? Maybe. No. Let's thank then Kira again. Thank you again. Thank you very much. Next speaker is Lisa Murray, postdoc, PhD student.
Postdoc.
Yes.
But what I'm presenting is on my PhD. So.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm Lisa Marie Hendricks. I'll be talking about urban land food systems transformations in Kampala specifically through the food shed. I would like to thank Kira to an extent already introduce my research a little bit. Some of the things will come up again. So I'm a geographer. I like to always start my presentations with a map of the world. And this map might not surprise many of you. The prevalence of food insecurity across the world, sub-Saharan Africa, comes out there as the most food insecure region in the world. While it is also the region that, if you look at where cities are located, it has the cities that are growing very, very rapidly, which has, of course, implications to the food system. So my case study area is this one over here. It's Kampala in Uganda. It is one of the most rapidly growing cities globally, with 5% yearly urban growth. And if we zoom in a little bit on what that growth looks like, over the past decades, from less than 1 million to more than 3 million people are located in Kampala. This is, of course, a land use pattern we call urban sprawl, very horizontal growth of the city. And what this means for the food system, first of all, is just that there's less space for urban, peri-urban agricultural. So the city takes up more and more space, and all the green space within and around the city was a lot of agricultural land. Also, it creates a generally very inefficient urban form. Central markets, food markets are often still located in the inner city. Huge traffic jams. People every day need to go to work or to go buy food. So it's an inefficient city system. And also, of course, there's a higher food demand. 4 million people compared to less than 1 million people just a few decades ago means that more logistics are necessary for food to reach this specific urban area. And as also mentioned by Janelle and Kira, there's dietary shifts. So people move to urban areas, often incomes go higher. People tend to eat different things in cities than in rural areas if they move from there. So then zooming even further in the city, we also see this pattern of socioeconomic segregation. So all of these ways in which food systems are impacted by urbanization. As you can imagine, if you live on the left or on the right side of this picture, you're going to be impacted in different ways. So that's something I want to look into. Of course, alongside global changes, we've had COVID, we've had conflicts, we've had climate change-induced disasters. All of these are reasons why the main objective of my research and of my PhD then was to get a better geographical understanding of food systems transformations in this African urbanizing and segregation context. So that being said, we did household survey-based research. We did about 750 surveys with households in Kampala in 2019 and 2021. We asked about socioeconomic indicators as well as food systems and food accessibility indicators and consumption indicators. Looked also into urban agriculture. And here, statistically, we were able to derive 4 socioeconomic groups. We have a big difference in terms of how long they've been in Kampala. Remember the expanding city. If you've been there since the 80s, so the time you spent in the city, you would call them established households. They can be high or low income. But we also have the newcomers to the city, new rural urban migrant households that have spent on average only about 5 years in the city. In terms, of course, of their purchasing power, we have high, low, and middle-income households. This is all relative to our data set, of course. Low generally means it's below the international poverty line. And urban agriculture was also a big difference here, where quite unrelated to income, we saw that as if you are established in the city, you've lived there for a long time, you have more access to agricultural land, which means that you can, even if it's small scale, like indicated on the picture, just between the houses. So these are the 4 socioeconomic groups that we will look at, their food metrics and their food shed. Food metrics, we use the Food Insecurity Experience Scale, which is a metric based by the FAO. It's a score from 0 to 8, ranging from food secure to moderately food insecure to severely food insecure. It's a survey-based metric. That's also what that first map I was showing you was based on. And we also looked at household dietary diversity score, which is a 24-hour recall. What did you eat yesterday? And we would take all the boxes of how many food categories someone consumed in the previous day out of those 12. So quite unsurprisingly, and I'm going to focus more on the established high income versus the newcomers low income, as those are the most 2 contrasting groups. The established high income households, still they are about a quarter of them are moderately or severely food insecure. But this is more than half for newcomers with a low income. And in dietary diversity, there is more than 1.5 food group consumed more per day between those 2 contrasting groups. Looking at the food shed then, what is a food shed? Maybe I should explain that first. We took a household consumer perspective. A household, of course, in this case, for example, located in the inner city, but we did consider the greater metropolitan area. Where would the household obtain food? We would ask the top 5 food items, their staple food items. Where do you obtain it? This could be, for example, at a food market or at a retailer, or even from their own agricultural lands nearby or further away. And then we also did surveys with food vendors and all types and asked them, where is the food grown, through which kind of suppliers that you are selling at this location, to then be able to trace back the supply chain from household to the origin of the food that they consumed, this then being the household food shed analogous to a watershed. So, of course, for this, we needed vendor surveys. We did about 300 vendor surveys during those same time period, from market vendors to mobile street vendors, retailers, supermarkets. And here we found that homegrown by households, so their own agricultural production, was mainly important for the established high-income households. Whereas for newcomers, this was only about 1%. This is an equivalent retail value of the food. Supermarkets, again, the supermarketization might be overstated. For Kampala, as in the whole data set, only about 1% of all the staple food was purchased there. So I won't be delving into that further. And the newcomers are also very, very reliant on these retailers, which are local vendors, often in residential areas. They sell in very small quantities, often on credit. If you have only the money maybe to buy a few things, maybe a couple eggs that day, they will do that for you, also because they know where you live, you're in the same streets. It's a very informal relationship oftentimes. So this is then the food shed if we trace it back. So this map shows where the food consumed by our survey participants in Kampala was produced. So you see that 95% of all the food items or the staple foods that they indicated were grown within the country of Uganda, with 50% grown in a region about the size of the country where I'm from, which is Belgium. This is interesting because then if you look at the more local scale, and if we look at this by group, this map shows the distance from the city to what percentage of the food shed came from. And you see that that first 5 to 15%, depending on the socioeconomic group, on average it was about 9.5% of all the food that's consumed in the city came from kilometer zero, so our study area. And it's only that remaining 5% that was imported from abroad. So actually, if you calculate that out for the staple food items, that means that urban agriculture in this case is twice as important as imports from other countries. So then to future scenarios. What does that mean if we look at the future? My hypothesis was that, well, if we see this urbanization continuing and the city grows, urban agricultural land has to make way for more and more residential area, we see that the food shed might need to become larger. So we made an agent-based model, which is currently in review, where one agent would have a socioeconomic group, their urban farming status, tied to that is space requirements. How many pixels do they need for their space for their household? How many years have they spent in Kampala? Their food insecurity and diversity that's related to all of the above. So as the city expands, people from peri-urban rural areas move towards the city, urban agriculture disappears. We did this by using an elder meat algorithm and looking at certain variables of how, if we compare the land use in 2002 of where the four groups lived to 2020 has expanded, how will that look like in the future? And this, I'm not sure if the GIF is clear on this screen, shows how then in the future now, if you see it when it jumps back, how the city, according to the model, is going to expand. But the main takeaways here is that the model projects a loss of agricultural land, on average in the greater Kampala area, about 9%, but up to 30% locally, slightly increased food insecurity, and lower dietary diversity, especially for those strongly reliant on urban agriculture. And I would like to thank you for your attention. You can scan the QR code or look up some of my research if you want more information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa Marie. And indeed, there was a nice link with the previous presentation.
Yeah.
Any questions? There's one here. Oh, I can go closer next.
Thank you very much for this very interesting study and very excellent presentation.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you would be talking to development cooperation or like foreign investors. We've heard that that's often like a very powerful force, and they wanted to do something sustainable there. What would you recommend them to do, or where could these projections be directed in the way of like, I mean, in Europe we have these food gardens or like food forests or I don't know, diversified food production around urban areas. How could there like these sustainable alternatives
be helpful for such a mega city?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So he was asking about if I spoke with global development organizations, etc. I couldn't hear you very well. But so I have spoken to some, and also to, of course, we're in contact. This is all collaborative with local university and with the city authorities as well. And I think that the general, both the academics, the aid organizations or research corporations, everyone seems to be very focused on urban agriculture and how to, they generate workshops, they put up example farms of how to sustainably create food in the city, while we see that there is a huge land use pressure, but also, there's a lot of voices that the soil isn't actually that suitable or it's been contaminated, etc. There's also whole arguments against that very policy and international focus on urban agriculture as this nature-based solution, because in the end, are you then shifting maybe the blame a bit onto local consumers of, well, if you can't reach your food security or dietary diversity goals, you should produce some food yourself, find some land, or go to more peri-urban land every day and cultivate that. So I guess, or indeed I haven't touched too much on any policy recommendations, but what we did recommend in the paper was a balanced food shed where maybe the international, the national, and the very local should be balanced in a way also to mitigate local shocks or national level shocks. And that if you put a lot of focus on urban agriculture, we know it's the opportunity for land is going to disappear in the future, at least if the city keeps growing like this. So I hope that answers your question to an extent.
Thank you.
We can talk later.
Thank you again. Time is up soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So we are staying in the urbanization scene with the next presentation from Ushnik Mukherjee.
Hello everyone, my name is Ashwin Mukherjee. I'm a research associate at the University of Waterloo, and today I'll be talking about biodigesters, specifically centralized biodigesters in the North American context, and how they can offer a solution to some of the challenges that we are facing at the food, water, and energy nexus. So, before starting to talk about biodigesters, we have to talk about livestock waste and food waste. And in present day, livestock waste, especially manure and food waste, present a significant challenge in how they are managed, and they contribute to significant greenhouse gas emissions and water quality impacts. And so how did we get here? So if you look at the image on the right-hand side here, this image is kind of representative of a farm operation in the post-World War II era, in the late 1940s, where livestock density was quite low, and the manure generated on operations could be recycled quite efficiently back to the land for crop uptake and crop growth. But fast forward a few decades, and industrialization and mechanization of the farming sector in North America, and you see a lot of high-density operations across the North American landscape, and these are CAFOs, or concentrated animal feeds operation systems. I think that's what I'm missing the acronyms a lot, but they've been concentrated at smaller number of operations across the landscape. And what that ended up leading to happening is a spatial disconnect in where manure sources are and where the nutrients from these manure sources are required. And if you look at the image on the left-hand side here, you see the net P budget in the US, and the blue kind of indicates where there's a need for more phosphorus, and the red indicates where there's excess manure P available. And similarly, on the right-hand side, you see the dark blue colors are manure nitrogen sinks, and the brown colors indicate manure nitrogen source. So, coming back to biodigesters, specifically agricultural biodigesters, because biodigesters are not a new thing. They have been here for a while, and they are widely used to manage waste, especially biosolids and human waste in wastewater treatment plants. But agricultural biodigesters are a different topic altogether, because they suffer, the challenge with their adoption is scale, because a lot of anaerobic digester, biodigesters require a lot of feedstock, especially at, let's say, if you're looking at it at an individual operation level. There are studies that have estimated that you need almost 3,000 dairy cows worth of manure to make sense for them to work economically. There have been studies who have pointed out that there's benefits from having these digesters managing manure and food waste in terms of how much clean electricity you can produce and the greenhouse gas emissions that you can reduce from managing these waste feedstocks. So our work, what it looks at this current farm system and city systems which manage their waste in independent silos, and then bringing in a centralized biodigester and transporting this waste to these biodigesters, and then looking at how much energy the energy could be recovered from these waste feedstocks, and how much the digested we could produce that has a nutrient value for it. And in our study, we look at the cost of transporting these feedstocks and also the greenhouse gas emissions that come from it. Similarly, at the biodigester location, we look at the cost and the greenhouse gas emissions. And at the end, we also evaluate the system based on how much it costs to produce renewable natural gas, and call it, we kind of quantify it in dollars per gigajoule, where a gigajoule is essentially equivalent to, let's say, if you have a 60-watt bulb, that bulb can be powered for 6 months, that's 1 gigajoule of energy. And then we also look at how much energy is being produced. And again, we look at greenhouse gas emissions in terms of what we can offset in terms of fossil natural gas production and mineral fertilizer production. So this is our optimization model, where we look at cost, energy, and we have manure supply constraint, food waste supply constraint, and we constrain the capacity of our digesters within a reasonable science range that's observed in the literature and in the market. And the case study we are presenting today is for Ontario in Canada, the province of Ontario, where we mapped out all the barns across the province, specifically dairy, beef, chicken, and hog barns, through a remote sensing approach. And we came up with a gridded data set for manure hotspots, as well as we used census data on employment and population to quantify food waste across the province. And clearly, you can see here an obvious trend where you see wherever there is high amounts of manure available in the top map, and when you compare it with the bottom map, there's not a lot of food waste available. So it's kind of inverse in terms of location, where the feedstock's available. So what if we solve that optimization problem that I just showed you, just maximize for energy produced across the landscape? So I want you to focus on this number first at the bottom here. So this shows the system level cost. So if you were to maximize for energy production, what ends up happening is that you use up all the feedstock and you produce that 32 million gigajoules per year. What it ends up costing is roughly $71 per gigajoule. That's kind of counting all these biodigesters and how much they cost and how much energy they produce. And if you look at the individual biodigester level, you see most of these plants are in the red zone here with the bins over here, where most of them cost over $30 per gigajoule. But the current market price in Ontario for renewable natural gas is at $24 per gigajoule. So this system doesn't make sense. So what if we tweak the optimization model by essentially taking that energy that we produce and constraining that model to produce that same amount of energy but minimizing for cost? So what that ends up being is a very different map here, where both of these maps have the same amount of energy output, but you're minimizing for cost. And that leads to a lot more of these plants that are being built that fall within this $20 to $30 per gigajoule bin. And when you look at the system level cost here, it comes down from $71 per gigajoule to $26 per gigajoule. And you also see spatial at the individual biodigester level. You see spatial heterogeneity in how much they cost. If you look at this manure hotspot area over here, we see a lot of these plants have mostly manure as feedstock and some food waste available, and they cost a little bit more. Versus if you look at this area where which is the Greater Toronto area. It's a big urban sprawl. You have a lot of food vegetable available, which is a high energy feedstock, and you end up having lower cost plants. And if you look at it from the number of digesters being cited, you see that a lot less digesters are being cited across the map, and that kind of alludes to a case for centralization, because what we end up seeing is that there are 400 biodigesters, and most of them are being designed to have a capacity of 120 kilotons per year. So they are being sized at the maximum limit that's set for the model. So what we ended up doing is we allowed the model to increase, to have flexibility in what size it can choose, and increase it to 1,000 kilotons per year, and we see a lot less plants again. Similar trends in at the individual level, how the bioregisters, what they cost, and again, when we look at it and look at that map along with the size distribution of the plants, you see wherever there's a high amount of manure, you see larger plants being built that are managing manure and some food waste. And when you move away from that dense feedstock available region, you see smaller plants being built. So, coming back to the greenhouse gas piece, so what we see is that when we had the size set to, or the capacity set, maximum capacity set to 120 kilotons per year, you end up having a net carbon negative scenario. Most of the carbon offsets are coming from offsetting or fertilizer production. But when you compare it to the conventional system where none of this feedstock is going to biodigesters, you actually have a lot more emissions, where you're roughly having almost 2,460 kilotons of emissions per year. So quickly, just jumping on, when you increase the size, what ends up happening is that centralization leads to more the feedstock travels further, so that increases our emissions, but in the grand scheme of things, net emissions don't really increase that much. And to finally conclude, what we observed is that biodigesters provide an effective way to manage manure and food waste, and larger biodigesters allow for focused centralization of waste handling and can lead to low costs. And what we see is that you can't have a set price for renewable natural gas. You need spatially explicit incentive structure for their adoption.
Thank you very much, Ushnik, for the presentation. Do you have questions? Yeah. See one just behind you, Julie.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you. Very nice presentation. So I don't know too much about this topic, but I'm curious to know if how applicable this is to tropical countries. If this holds up in tropical regions. I know, for example, in Kenya, they're promoting a lot biodigesters. So I wanted to know if you think this approach could be applied in tropical countries.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like if there's enough feedstock available and there's a scheme where these are being promoted, I feel like there is a scope for them to be applied. And this framework of analyzing biodigesters and their effectiveness can be again modified. You don't have to just look at cost and energy. You can add additional objectives where you look at how much emissions you are actually allowing, because feedstock transport requires leads to emissions, right? So you have to constrain those things. You can look at how water quality gets impacted, because if you leave manure on the field versus moving it to the biodigester, there are some trade-offs in terms of water quality impact. So you can add all these pieces into the optimization model and actually come up with very different maps than what I showed you here. So it's a complex problem, and you can have very different solutions when you run it differently.
Thank you. There is a question at the back. I have a lot of questions myself. One was on water quality, so you just addressed it.
Thank you for the great presentation. I think my question was around elaborating a bit on the spatially explicit incentive structure that you mentioned, because from the presentation, it sounds as if this is a win-win environmentally and from a cost perspective. So would there be other challenges in terms of smell if you put these biodigesters in a different area? Like, what would the barriers? Why isn't this already happening on the ground if it is a win-win?
Yeah, in terms of spatially explicit policy, like incentive structure, pull the map back. Anyways, the thing is, when you look at it at the system level, right, you have one cost, but if you look at individual biodigesters, you have very different costs. And when you're optimizing as a whole system. So, but there's only one price of renewable natural gas in the current market. So, as an operator of, let's say, if you're operating the entire network, not all of your plants are going to actually make money. Some will and some won't. So, essentially, that, and nobody's going to be operating all those biodigesters, right? So, in terms of, I think what our work has helped, because we work with industry partners, is it allows us to kind of, they'll ask us, let's say, they'll focus on one part of the map here and say, like, give us the potential for bioenergy to be produced in like a 20 kilometer radius, 100 kilometer radius, and that allows us to go in there and kind of give the numbers on what would be the costs. And of course, most of the projects in the current economic climate would focus on places where there's a lot of feedstock available, and like the regions further north of the province, those are feedstock sparse areas where you would not have a big case for putting out a biodigester there. But if you are looking at it holistically and trying to solve a problem which is not just bioenergy and also water quality, that's when these, like, there would be extra costs, and that's where you have to account for. In terms of the smell and all, I haven't looked at that yet, but that's an interesting angle to explore for sure.
Thank you very much. And we are going to move to the last but not least presentation of this morning with Kostas Delis, who's a postdoctoral researcher, talking about the Mediterranean diet and the implication for food security and emissions in Greece. Awesome. Floor is yours, Kostas. Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm Kostas Delis. I'm from the Iforia Network, a research umbrella with many different research organizations based in Athens, Greece, the Athens University of Economics and Business, and the Athena Research Center, but also home to research accelerators and innovation promotion agencies like Brigade Connect, and in close collaboration with the UNSDSN. I will be discussing the effects of shifting to Mediterranean diets for Greece using the Fable calculator, and to this end, I'm going to go very quickly through, given that it's the last presentation, facts that we all know, but still they seem to be very, very important, especially the role of the agriculture and the agri-food sector in total global emissions, and the way that in the EU, almost 45% total environmental impacts are accounted by the agri-food system, and the very, very enhanced role of livestock and livestock production. So this is reflected a lot on the diets and the consumption side of things. Moreover, there is currently, you can see the agri-food system as being part of the problem, but it can be a huge part of the solution with huge potential to generate portfolio benefits and actually reduce, according to recent studies, 10 to 12 trillion US dollars in hidden costs every year. As we can see, the majority of the agricultural emissions have to do with meat and dairy production and consumption, so the importance of changing the dietary patterns is evident. A few words about the Greek agricultural sector. It is one of the employment is more than 10%, which is the second highest share in the EU, so it's declining in importance, but it's still a rather big part of the economy. On the left panel of the slide, you can see the drop in total agricultural emissions. However, the graph next to it, the line chart next to it, the blue line shows that the share of of agricultural emissions over total emissions is growing, which means that efforts are being made, but the sector lacks in efficiency compared to other sectors such as manufacturing or transport. And most of it is related to livestock emissions, as we can see on the right-hand side panel. So the Mediterranean diet, many of you are quite familiar. It's very close to the Lancet recommendation. It's heavily based on non-processed cereal, vegetable, fruits, less meat, less red meat, less dairy consumption. We can see that the 2020 historical trends increase in the last bar is very close to what the Fable calculator defines as a fat diet. So despite the fact that Greece is a Mediterranean country, the dietary patterns are very far from what we would call a Mediterranean diet and have been diverging over the past years even more. So there's a clear mechanism through the diets, the healthy diets, and even the Mediterranean diet for reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Obviously, less red meat, less livestock, less CH4 in the atmosphere, less land, which can lead to land use change-related emission reductions, and fewer use of pesticides and fertilizers. Finally, we can lower food waste and therefore reduce indirectly emissions associated with production, transportation, and disposal. This has been documented in a series of research papers and reports, and it's definite that there is quite a big untapped potential through reform in dietary patterns to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at the local and the global level. However, this does not come without challenges. So the striking the balance globally between feeding a growing population and reducing greenhouse gas emissions through healthier diets is more than evident, and it's very difficult changing patterns and behaviors at the local level, in diets and in all aspects. However, you have to respect tradition, know-how, culture, perhaps religious effects, and this calls for more localized global initiatives in the sense that they respect local needs and challenges in delivering global guidelines. Finally, case very strong in the EU, but also beyond, livestock agriculture lobbying. We know that this has led to scaling back several ambitious reforms over the past years, and we can have a first sense with the new Commission on where this is going for the next 5 or 6 years. So why dual dividend? Maybe through the course of the presentation we can see that it's more than double dividend. However, in the case of food security, we can associate the Mediterranean diet with a smaller cost for households, since vegetables have a lower effect on grocery costs. If we see the last couple of years with the prices of olive oil, this can be debatable, but over the long run, it's associated with less spending by the households, undisputed health benefits, increased sovereignty for the case of Greece and other Mediterranean countries in the sense that we co-locate production and consumption, and finally it can reinforce this sense of cultural practices and cultural concentration within certain parts of the world. However, this is a work in progress on our side. We're using the Fable calculator in case you have not been present in any of the other presentations of the Fable team. It's a demand-based Excel accounting tool, so looking at 88 raw and processed agri-food indicators and products, we shape demand through a series of assumptions. Given the constraints in land and regulation, we see what this implies for a series of environmental, economic, trade variables such as production by product type, biodiversity indicators, greenhouse gas emissions, trade in agricultural products. So we use this tool to model the effect of the Mediterranean diet in the case of Greece. So we keep the first step, we keep all other levers the same as is defined by the current trends pathway in Fable, otherwise business as usual, and we just change the current diet to a Mediterranean diet and see where this gets us. And then we enrich this, we embed this in a different pathway where more reforms, especially on the supply side, are used. And finally, something that we will not show here is the cross-sectoral effects through input-output tables, so estimating the backward linkages, what this implies for production, and hence greenhouse gas emissions in other sectors other than agriculture. So the effect is quite pronounced. Just tweaking the diet part of the whole process gives this divergence, and so the green line is the Mediterranean diet scenario, the Mediterranean diet pathway, where we have 5% drop in greenhouse gas emissions as early as 2030 compared to 2020. But if we compare it to the business as usual scenario, the deficit is really high, it's 15%, and leading to a 46% drop in total agricultural greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So a sharp decline compared to the business as usual scenario, showing the great potential, mostly through reduction in pasture land and what this implies for the livestock sector. However, we can also see the green part of the bars, which is land use change. So sequestration, basically, less pasture land, more land where sequestration can be performed, so to speak. So this gives the rapid and pronounced decline in greenhouse gas emissions by only changing this very important lever. Splitting between methane and nitrogen, NO2, we see this balanced effect in the reduction. Obviously, more in terms of volume in CS4. However, the change is pretty similar due to more better management in fertilizer and pesticide in all agricultural production across the spectrum. And what I was thinking before when I said that it can be more than double, the dividend can be more than double, is this reduction in costs through the diet, and which can be a bargaining power, a card in the stakeholder engagement. So we know that production is going to drop. However, we see a very important cost-reducing effect as early as 2030 compared to the business as usual scenario, and then stabilization in values considerably lower if we adopt this difference in dietary patterns. However, one could expect, and is evident, that agricultural production drops significantly compared to what would have happened in the current scenario. It's not as pronounced compared to what is the situation, what is the trend in 2020, and the green line is just the first effort of us to embed the Mediterranean diet in a wider series of reforms. For example, increased crop and livestock productivity and organic practices, which would ameliorate this production reducing effect. However, we're in the process of linking other scenarios and different combination of scenarios with our analysis. So, just a couple of facts stemming from our research is that we need an explicit integration of the Mediterranean diet in the local policy in the National Health Strategy. The Health and Dietary Committee was established as late as March 2024, so we need to see something stemming from that. And since we have no time left, I can leave the slide here and you can reach out for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kostas. We have time for one quick question before lunch. Talking about Mediterranean diets, sweet Mexican diets. Yeah. One question.
Thank you very much. I was wondering, as diets are so deeply embedded in cultures and customs, I wonder how you can bring about change by how you can bring. I'm pretty close. How you can bring about change by simply changing guidelines for diets. I mean, that's a very challenging thing, right? For people to not eat meat, for example, or
It's not simple. Yeah, it's quite the opposite for the case of fish, because we have shifted away from the cultural and the traditional aspects and move to a more meat-based and fast food-based diet. So it's definitely going to be easy. It's not a matter that a simple committee can solve from the one day to the next. But what we wanted to say is that through maybe some of these results, we can also show the cost-reducing effects both for consumers and producers. So this can at least nudge towards a small change, not something as gigantic as maybe we've shown here, but even a small change and can lead to next steps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moses. Okay, this is the end of our session. So thank you all for coming, and thanks again to all of our speakers.